Crank Brothers are out and HT pedals are in. There's a few reasons why I got rid of Crank Brothers in favor of HT, but the main one is probably the sound of the engagement. So let's take a listen. Oh! Who doesn't want to hear that every morning? Ooh, that's gonna be annoying. Fucking gnats everywhere. God damn. Ow, fucker. Bit me. God. All right guys, so it was pretty obvious by the title and thumbnail of this video that I got rid of Crank Brothers pedals in favor of HT pedals. So I'm gonna tell you why I did that. Now, I've been on Crank Brothers up until this point, ever since I started riding clipless pedals. So that's probably about 2 to 3 years now, give or take a little bit. I chose to learn riding clipped in with Crank Brothers for the same reason that most mountain bikers do, I think. And the first reason is because in the mountain bike downhill enduro community, I feel like Crank Brothers might be the most widely used pedal. So everyone else was using it, so that led me to start using it too. The other reasons, if you've read any reviews online, it always points this out, that Crank Brothers are very easy to get in and out of, which I can agree with, and that they also handle mud very well. So if you're riding downhill and enduro, the two aspects of mountain biking where conditions never really matter and you often ride in really nasty conditions, having a pedal that clears mud very easily and allows you to get in and out just like normal is really important to have. Now, as with anything that you use for a prolonged period of time, you start to notice the little flaws that they might have, if they have any. And that was the case for me with Crank Brothers. So after a couple of years on Crank Brothers, there was one major flaw that led me to want to look for a different pedal to use. And that one major flaw is that they just didn't hold my feet in tight enough. Crank Brothers are actually a very simple pedal, being that the tension is preset, there's no adjustment on it, but that's also the downfall. So some people might like that it's just kind of a set it, forget it pedal. It comes with one preset tension, and then they have a couple different options for cleats that can make it a little bit easier or a little bit harder to get out of, so it's up to you. But that's also where the problems start to come out. On the cleats end of things, their cleats are made out of brass, which is soft metal, which means that they wear out really fast. Now, as far as I know, this wasn't strategic in any way other than you have to buy cleats more often so the company makes more money. You really start to notice within a couple weeks of riding, depending on how much you ride, that the Crank Brothers cleats start to wear out pretty quick, which means that they don't hold your cleat as tight and the release angle starts to get a little bit wider. I think it would be wider, not narrower, wider. So it comes out too easy. This was starting to become very apparent to me. I wish I had videos of it, but I was starting to have this happen to me where I'd be riding park, where I would hit a drop or something, and that impact, especially if my pedals were a little slippery, the impact would cause my feet, one foot, sometimes both feet, to just slip off and blow off of my pedals. And that is definitely not what you want when you're riding downhill. Another issue with your cleats wearing out too quick is that they start to get a little more float as they wear out. And float is the ability for your shoe and your cleat to kind of float a little bit back and forth on the pedal so that you have a little bit of range of motion within your foot. Now, me personally, I've never really understood the purpose of float and why people like it, because if you're a flat pedal rider, you're used to your shoe being stuck on the pins and not moving, having zero float. So for me personally, I don't like float. I want zero float cleats that once my foot is clipped in the way I like it, I want it to stay there. I don't want to have to worry about it moving anywhere. So that was another problem I was having with Crank Brothers, is as the cleats wore out, which starts happening pretty quick, you get more and more float. And yes, I did try using their zero float cleats that were better, but they still started to wear out way too quickly. Now, the third thing that was happening at the same time has to do with the spring that they use. Now, I don't think there's any way to measure this, at least that I know of or that I'm capable of. But it seems like as you use the pedals and as you bounce them off of rocks and whatnot, the spring in here starts to get inconsistent. It's got 4 different sides in here that you can use for engagement, and it just seems like over the course of time, as I use them and beat them up, one side or another, maybe 2, however many, it just felt like some of the sides were a little more inconsistent than others, and the engagement just wasn't as tight as others. So I don't know if that's a legit thing. Like I said, I can't actually measure that right here, right now, but it just felt like this spring was becoming inconsistent and there's no way, like on other pedals, for you to adjust that tension. So the combo of those three things, the tension, the cleats wearing out, and my feet blowing off, have really led me to not necessarily want to switch pedals, because everyone else that I know runs Crank Brothers and I can switch bikes for them whenever I want. But when your feet start blowing off, things become dangerous. So I was forced to look elsewhere, and that led me to HT. The first thing you guys are probably wondering is why I chose HT over Shimano, which is probably the most widely used form of clipless pedal in the whole cycling community. And there's a few reasons for that. The main reason is that I just tried both of them. So I tried some XTR pedals, and while I liked how they felt when I was in the pedal, I found them pretty hard to locate the engagement point and actually get engaged. This is especially important when choosing a pedal, because when you're out riding, whether that's enduro, downhill, cross country, whether that be in a racing scenario or just out having fun, if you dab a foot, you want to be able to get back into your pedal as easily as possible, and I didn't feel like that was the case with Shimano over HT. Shimano and HT both do offer the advantage over Crank Brothers, where they have steel cleats instead of brass. They also both have tension adjustment. So once again, when you leave Crank Brothers and are choosing between Shimano and HT, it kind of comes down to personal preference. So I really encourage you to try both like I did to see which one you want, or you can just take my word for it, that's up to you. But overall, HT, the engagement, getting into the pedal, finding that location point, the entry point, was way easier than Shimano. It actually feels very similar to Crank Brothers. It's definitely a little bit harder to clip into just because you have a tension adjuster. I have the tension on these set to, I think, just under half, so just under 50% tension, and they definitely are quite a bit tighter than what I had on Crank Brothers, which is what I wanted. I want it to be a little tighter.
That's what she said.
They don't wear out, so they stay consistent all the time, which is really what you should want out of a clipless pedal. So the other nice thing about HT pedals, which I wasn't expecting, is that they send you 2 sets of cleats when you buy new pedals. They send you cleats with 4 degrees of float and 8 degrees of float. I'm using the 4 degrees of float version, and I know I said a minute ago that I want cleats with 0 float, and while this isn't 0 float, since it's a lot tighter tension and they don't wear out, the float doesn't feel nearly as much as it does on Crank Brothers, because on Crank Brothers it feels like the float just grows and grows every time you ride, because they wear out a little bit more every time you ride. So I'm happy with the 4 degrees float on this. They're steel cleats, so they're not gonna wear out nearly as quick as the brass cleats do. And if these start to wear out a little bit, I can just tighten the tension a little bit to kind of keep up with it and counteract it. The obvious downside that people are gonna find with these is that, oh, they don't clear mud as good as the Crank Brothers do. And while that might be the case, they clear mud better than a Shimano pedal would, because Shimano kind of has that enclosed little bit design. If you've ever looked at one, you know what I'm talking about. This isn't nearly as enclosed as a Shimano, so it shouldn't clear mud all too bad. And be honest with yourself, how often do you really ride in nasty conditions? Probably not as much as you think you do, so it's really not a concern to me. And if you are riding in nasty mud all the time, just get better and never unclip. Hold on and let her eat. I wish I had more to show you with these pedals, but there's really not a whole lot of differences other than why I switched. So HT, the cleats aren't gonna wear out, and it gives me some adjustability, which is exactly what I wanted in a clipless pedal. So if you guys use Crank Brothers and noticed the same problems that I had with it, let me know in the comments. I wanna hear what your concerns were with Crank Brothers and what you're experiencing, and whether or not you chose HT or chose Shimano, or if you're about to choose them too. So that wraps up the video, so I guess we'll see you in the next one.